Hey guys, before we get started today, I want to address some changes that might be coming to the channel. This is still a very small channel, comparatively speaking. I mean, I've got less than 20,000 subscribers, but apparently it's gotten big enough now that it's starting to draw the attention of certain copyright holders. YouTube's copyright system is kind of broken, in my opinion, in that it puts the burden of proof on the accused rather than the accuser, and as much as I hate to admit it, I can't fight the copyrights of certain major companies like Universal Studios. They have all the lawyers, and I'm just a small-time content creator who makes about $200 a month. So, I'm gonna have to start changing up how I edit my videos, and as much as that saddens me to say, I'm gonna have to use a lot more still images and not so much full-motion video. I do this because I just don't want to be fighting this anymore. It's been a losing battle, and every time I file a dispute, it gets shot down immediately because the copyright holder doesn't actually have to do anything. They just have to say, no, I still don't like it, and there's nothing I can do unless I want to get a lawyer. And, well, like I said, I make about $200 a month in ad revenue. So, with this video in particular is where it's going to start, because even though I've never had any issue with a Hammer movie before, this one was distributed in the US by Universal International, so they might be getting in on it. And I want to stop making those videos where I have the full motion go to the channel members and the regular still image come out to you guys. I want everybody to have the same experience on my channel. And so that's what I'm going to be doing from going forward. It sucks because I find working with still images a lot less fun, and it makes my videos look less professional. Not that they look professional, I'm just saying they look less professional. So yeah, that's it. Now that that's out of the way and you know what's coming, let's just get on with the actual intro to this video. In 1957, Hammer Films found itself at a crossroads. On one hand, it had Val Guest, a serious director interested in making serious films like The Camp on Blood Island, a movie set in a Japanese POW camp right after the end of World War II. However, critics hated it. It spurned massive controversy, Japan tried to block its release, and its financials, while not terrible, weren't anything special. On the other hand, Hammer had Terence Fisher, a workhorse director who had just struck gold with the crowd-pleasing Curse of Frankenstein, a reimagining of Mary Shelley's novel that amped up the exploitation, ignored the critics, and made tons of money. Hammer chose to lean into the latter, with studio co-founder James Carreras bluntly stating, "We hate message films, we make entertainment." With that in mind, the studio got to work reimagining the grand monarch of Gothic horror, the immortal vampire, Count Dracula.
We have it within our power to rid the world of this evil, and with God's help, we'll succeed.
After Jonathan Harker is turned into a vampire by the evil Count Dracula, his mentor, Dr. Van Helsing, a man who has dedicated his life to hunting the undead, sets out to find him. At Dracula's castle, he ends his tutor's unlife but is unable to track down the monster responsible. Little does he realize that Dracula has gone to Harker's widow, Lucy, to exact terrible revenge. And after Van Helsing fails to stop poor Lucy from a miserable fate, he and Lucy's brother Arthur set out to kill the beast once and for all, while in the shadows, the Count has already found his next victim.
After The Curse of Frankenstein became a big hit for Hammer, Jimmy Sangster was tasked with tackling another Universal classic monster, namely Dracula. As with Frankenstein, Sangster chose to base his story on the novel, not on the 1931 adaptation, and also to deviate pretty heavily from the source material in order to turn the story into something that could be made on a budget and told in less than 90 minutes. As for the financing, the historical record here is a bit of a Gordian knot that I'm nowhere near qualified enough to untangle. The short version, as I understand it, is that Columbia Pictures bought 49% of Hammer Films, which allowed Hammer to close its distribution arm, Exclusive Films, and finance more projects, including a couple every year that would be distributed by companies other than Columbia. Hammer then entered into very contentious negotiations with Universal to secure the rights to its library of classic monsters, and at some point, Universal agreed to let Hammer use Dracula in exchange for international distribution rights for the film, though the full deal between Hammer and Universal wouldn't be fully hammered out until after Dracula finished filming. For this new Dracula project, Anthony Hines once again served as producer, and Terence Fisher returned to the director's chair. In fact, most of the crew was the same as The Curse of Frankenstein's, and thus, when it came to casting the two leads, they only ever considered two men. To prepare for his role as the titular Count, Christopher Lee read the novel and went out of his way to not watch the 1931 Universal adaptation, which he claims to have not seen until after his run as Hammer's Dracula. He was vocally unenthusiastic about Sangster's script, believing it strayed much too far from Bram Stoker, but he nevertheless tried his best to stick as close to the book's description of his character as he could. When it came to Dracula's nemesis, Van Helsing, Peter Cushing rejected the idea of playing him as an older German caricature like Edward Van Sloan had, believing that, because of the actor's notoriety, audiences wouldn't buy it if he didn't look and sound more like himself. As his career progressed with Hammer, Cushing would embrace his status as a horror icon, calling it quote-unquote absolutely wonderful to be lucky enough to get associated with something so successful. That said, I have to admit I kind of prefer his Frankenstein to his Van Helsing. Other notable actors include Valerie Gaunt as Dracula's initial bride and, in fact, the first on-screen vampire to ever be shown in color, future Batman butler Michael Gough as the heroic Arthur Holmwood, Melissa Stribling as Mina, Carol Marsh as Lucy, John Van Issen as Jonathan Harker, and Jeffrey Bayldon as this Porter. Bayldon was only 37 at the time, and when he went in to get his makeup applied, his youth earned a very heavy sigh from Phil Leakey, who knew the character was supposed to be much older. Filming on Dracula took place over 2 months in November and December of 1958, entirely at Bray Studios and utilizing a brand new 7,200 square foot soundstage, which, while relatively small for a major studio, was absolutely enormous for Hammer. I can find no reports of any accidents on set, though Cushing did make the filmmakers nervous when he insisted on leaping over this banister himself. As for the effects, they were done by Sidney Pearson, who put significant effort into the final battle, while the music was composed once again by James Bernard, whose work here is even better than his work on The Curse of Frankenstein. Also, while I almost never discuss this in my videos, I do want to highlight the costumes, lovingly designed by Molly Arbuthnot, I think, because they are especially great. I personally would love to have Van Helsing's burgundy jacket, though I know I'd never look as good in it as Peter Cushing does. Hammer's Dracula released worldwide in May of 1958 to scathing reviews from the British press, who argued an X certificate wasn't sufficient given the bright red blood and revealing negligees on display. One reviewer for The Observer even went so far as to, quote, apologize to all decent Americans, unquote. However, the negative press only bolstered its credentials with audiences hungry for horror, and it earned roughly $3.5 million in theater rentals worldwide, over $1 million of which came from North America, where it was retitled to Horror of Dracula to avoid confusion with the 1931 Universal classic. It was also wildly popular in Japan for some reason, where the film was more explicit with the gore and violence, as proven when parts of the extended cut were discovered in 2011. Due to the movie's massive success, Hammer cancelled many of its other projects to focus on horror, even nixing a potential adaptation of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend to be directed by Val Guest. Then, after months of negotiation, the deal was finalized with Universal. The entire library of Universal classic monsters was handed to Hammer on a silver plate, leading to the development of movies based on The Mummy, The Invisible Man, The Phantom of the Opera, and The Old Dark House. Though the Hammer version of The Invisible Man never got made, which bums me out since I've already gone on record stating that The Invisible Man is my favorite of the Universal classic monsters. As for Hammer's Dracula, it would get 8 sequels, 4 with Peter Cushing and 6 with Christopher Lee. So while the Quatermass experiment provided the initial spark and The Curse of Frankenstein provided the kindling, it was Dracula that really started the bonfire around Hammer horror, letting the entire world know that a little independent British studio was going to continue making a lot of noise, much to the chagrin of the snobby British critics, who Michael Carreras said were full of crap and hot air. I attribute the success in large part to the ornate style of Hammer in those days, to the vivid color and elaborate sets that were used to mask tight budgets and even tighter spaces. That style lends itself even better to the gothic horror of Dracula than it does to Frankenstein, but it isn't the only thing that separates the Hammer adaptation from those that came before. As much as it would dog his career for many years, Christopher Lee almost single-handedly reinvented the title role, and to at least a generation, he is the definitive Count Dracula. At 6 feet 5 inches, Christopher Lee is a towering figure, and he infuses the character with a kind of overt sexual energy that Bela Lugosi could never have gotten away with. This Dracula is a force of nature, more beastly than Universal's, and the way women react to his presence is equal parts horrifying and titillating. Granted, Lee still doesn't get much screen time, only about 7 minutes, and he only has a few lines at the very beginning.
I am Dracula, and I welcome you to my house.
But I think knowing he is always there, just behind the scenes, stalking victims and seeking vengeance, makes him all the more fearsome. Peter Cushing is great as Van Helsing, too, a far more heroic figure than his Victor Frankenstein, and he carries the movie well when it passes between the brief scenes of Dracula. I also appreciate Sangster's bare-bones treatment of vampirism, which does away with more fantastic elements like bat transformation, and his more streamlined approach to the story, which changes the setting so that it only takes a few hours in-universe to get from place to place. A lot of Dracula purists might complain about how it shuffles around the key characters, turns Harker into a fledgling vampire hunter in over his head, and does away with Renfield, but to me, the variety works for the needs of this particular telling of the tale. Now, is 1958's Dracula better than Universal's? The fact I can even ponder that question should tell you how highly I place this movie in the top-tier list of cinematic Draculas. I guess, if pressed, I'd say the 1931 version is the most iconic, especially given Lugosi and his many quotable lines.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
But the 1958 version is probably scarier and more rewatchable. Maybe you'll think it's a cop-out, but I truly can't choose between them. Therefore, you know I'm going to say that 1958's Dracula is a certified horror classic. And that's all for tonight, my dear mortals. Who is the best Dracula to ever grace the silver screen? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to hammer those like and subscribe buttons. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when we'll talk about a baby even more horrible than Rosemary's, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not turning people into undead slaves.
An old man came here once to see his dear departed, and he fell down these stairs. It was quite amusing. He came to pay his last respects, and he remained to share them.